So recently, fellow YouTuber White Star made a video about a deck of cards he had made using collage and other methods that was for artistic creation, for world design, for game design, and was inspired by another creator whose name should be appearing on the screen now. It made me want to talk about this. Not just the pouch, which I also made, but what's inside the pouch. This is my storytelling deck. Now, as most of you following my channel will know, I am a professional oral storyteller. That is what I do for a living. A lot of the time, my performances are somewhat improvised. I pick out what stories to tell on the night, depending on the crowd. That isn't always the way I do things, but it often is. Now, I have a quite extensive repertoire. This is a full deck of playing cards, a 52 card deck. This isn't my entire repertoire. I know more stories than this. I can tell all of them from memory. But the problem with that is that I often face choice paralysis. I have so many stories I'm able to tell that sometimes I don't know which one to tell and I can't really figure it out. So I made this deck so that I could shuffle the cards, pull one out at random, and that would be the story that I tell. Now, there's a reason why I chose playing cards as the basis for this. This specific set of playing cards is based on an old 19th century design for the suits that doesn't have the numbers on them, like the number printed on them. I chose that because it was simpler for illustrating on. They're also uncoated, which made illustrating them easier. Since playing cards in Irish folklore are usually associated with vagabonds and troublemakers, and my profession requires me to traipse all around the country, usually on public transport, often getting home quite late at night or sleeping in an airport or something like that. And the stories I tell are usually specifically chosen to inspire joy in the hearts of the oppressed and terror in the hearts of politicians. I think I qualify as a vagabond and a troublemaker. I like to think I do, anyway. Now you can see I started putting it back on some of them, but never really finished the job. You can also see the ink leaking through to the back of some of them, which is why I wanted to do that. But I've got a lot of stories in here that I like to tell. For instance, we have the Kylock. Let's see, we'll shuffle a bit and see who else we get. We have Ben and Donner, the building of the Giant's Causeway. We have a story about a fairy bush. Some of these stories don't really have titles, which is why these are illustrated instead of me writing titles on them. I deal with folk tales from Ireland's National Folklore Collection. Nearly all of my stories are adapted from there, and many of those don't have titles. So this is an easier way of dealing with it. That's the Dead Mother. Interesting about that, I was at an event there the other week. I wasn't storytelling, I just happened to have my deck on me. And there was this lovely lady doing tarot readings. So we exchanged a one-card reading with each other. I got a reading from her tarot deck, she got a reading from my story deck. And the story she got was The Dead Mother, which is about a young girl who is saved from a sexual predator by the foresight of her mother's ghost. That is the death of Harry Stottle. Regular listeners of mine will be familiar with Harry Stottle. That is the water horse. I enjoy all of these stories. I enjoy every story that comes up in here. We have the Albluachra, the Headless Turkey of Birr, St. Columkill versus the Loch Ness Monster. That's a ridiculous story. The Piper of Knockfearna, which in my version ends in polyamorous bisexuality. I call that one the Horseless Head, because it's about a disembodied horse skull following a young girl around. And this is the story of Mickey Roberts, my local necromancer. Dogman. Dogman has been described by a friend of mine, who saw me perform for the first time, and they came up to me at the end and said, I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't furry gay werewolf porn. Which delights me. That's the Fishing Spear. That is a story that's traditionally referred to as Keshkoran, but I like to call it the forced feminization of Conan Whale. Dirt Blanket. The Dead Priest. That's another one that doesn't really have a title. It's about two confirmed bachelors who lived together for over 40 years and professed to hate each other. One said that he hated the other so much that when he died, he would hang on in the afterlife to continue berating him for the rest of time. And then when that second one died, they both stayed together as ghosts in the same house, and no one could ever move in because they were always arguing. That doesn't sound like hatred to me. That sounds like there's something else going on altogether to me. If your attachment to someone allows you to carry on beyond death, that sounds like something else entirely to me. I will do one more. Puka Prania. That one's great because it's a series of puns. It probably works better in Irish, but the word puka, it does of course refer to the fairy kind of fairy ghost thing. Whether a puka is a fairy or a ghost varies wildly from telling to telling. But the word puka can also refer to a cantankerous owl fella, like a crotchety old man. It can refer to a kind of snail. Yes, I think it can refer to a few other things, like there's also a kind of mushroom, and there's a children's game called Puka, but it's relevant to this story because it's about a man named Puka Prania, who is a cantankerous owl fella. He's a crotchety old man. And he dies. And when he dies, his body turns into a snail. So he goes from a puka to being a puka. And then the snail climbs into a fairy hill and just goes to live there. And ever since that snail went to that fairy hill, any time an older member of the community was passing by and was exhausted or feeling too unwell to keep walking, this gigantic horse creature with the head of a snail that was clearly some kind of fairy would come out and carry them back home. So the snail, the old man, the puka, turned into the snail, the puka, which turned into the fairy shapeshifter creature, the puka. It's just a series of puns. It's just intentionally using different definitions of the word puka, which I think is hilarious. So that's the story of Stingy Jack, which you're probably familiar with. Ooh, that's the Puss Muck. The Puss Muck was a man with the head of a pig, a very, very rich man who lived on the edge of a town. And he would marry poor young women, very beautiful poor young women who had only just come of age. And they would keep going missing because they kept investigating why he was leaving the bed in the middle of the night. And I'll not go further than there for now. It's a good story. Reminds me of a certain island. This is another Mickey Roberts story about him tricking a priest into eating a handkerchief full of snot. This is the Hare Hag. And this is one I call the Storm Baby. Like I said, these aren't all of the stories in my repertoire. I know actually a good few more than these. But these are just some of my favourites. But that is my deck of stories. It took me a fair while to put it together. And then took me a while again to get around to making the case. Actually, making the case took me an afternoon, but getting around to it took me months. I have found this very useful. It is great for when I'm at a loss as to what story to tell. So this is a really good resource for me to have. But there's one thing I want to try that I haven't done yet, which is doing a whole show drawing cards from this deck, and to turn the show itself into a kind of reading for the whole audience, like I did for the lady with the tarot cards. I think that could be fun. Like, what is the deck trying to tell you? What do these stories together, what kind of narrative do they put together? What kind of advice does that create? Will you two behave? Alright, so, tangent for a moment. There is a starling nest on our windowsill, right up against the kitchen windowsill. You can look into the nest from our kitchen. And a whole clutch of eggs has already, hatched and been raised and left the nest. I think these two little fuckers here, who are fighting over a little bit of my lunch that I threw out for them, are probably from that nest, and it's why they're not very shy. It's why they're so willing to come close to me, because most of the other starlings won't even come down to the ground while I'm here. But I think these two just know me because we had to walk past them every single day to go do the laundry. Anyway, that's, I believe, everything about these cards. I am bad at ending videos. So I hope you enjoyed this. Goodbye. Here is some starling bonus footage. You can see one's near the table and one's over by that bundle of sticks. I'm very unsuccessfully trying to grow woodier mushrooms on that bundle of elder sticks. The other one's just darted down the path there. Where are you? There you are. Anyway, there you go. Your bonus footage of starlings.